Gentlemen, we are back for, oh goodness, Vampires Are Real Part 2. We've got a lot of disturbing research to go through just on the adrenochrome stuff. Oh boy. I've discovered a lot of material that ties directly into my 2014 article in Theogen's What's in a Name that I published on the Gnostic Media, Logos Media website, which is this article right here on the front page. You can find that. I recommend everybody read that article because the people that we're going to be discussing today are all laid out in this article as part of Team 1. And let me see if I can find them in here. But anyway, there's Team 1 and Team 2, and these were the guys who developed the different names for psychedelics. Team 1 included Aldous Huxley, ding, 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 Humphrey Osmond, Abram Hoffer, and John Smithies. Team 2 contained was Professor Carl Ruck from Boston University, who is my actually the very first episode of this show 10 years ago this month. And he also worked with Jonathan Ott and Jeremy Bigwood and some other people, Gordon Wasson, etc., for Team 2, developing, again, the various names that we use for hallucinogens, psychotomimetics, psychedelics, etc. Of course, I call them suggestogens, but all of this is going to tie in today. Essentially, the same players that I exposed in this article working for the CIA to market the drugs to the youth are the same exact people who did the initial adrenochrome research and came up with the adrenochrome theory. I also want to start off by thanking Tatiana Radushin for her help from Serbia in getting us a lot of research and things, some of which will be going into to today's show, but some of it won't be. She, found a lot of good information trying to flesh out werewolves as well, and that appears to tie to wolfbane. I don't know how much we'll be able to get to werewolves today, but there's a lot of interesting information that she's been sending. So thank you for those in Serbia, etc., for helping with this research. It's much appreciated. So hvala ti puno, Tatiana. And Caleb, thanks for coming back on for part 2 of this. I can't hear you right now. Are you muted? I can't hear you at all.
Sorry.
There you go.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So anyway, where should we start off? I know we both have quite a few points to bring up. You want me to kick it off first, or would you like to?
No, I'd really like to hear these bombshells that you've been talking about for the
Okay.
last half hour.
All right. So first off, I came across, well, actually, it's already in the database. And for those of you who want to find it, of course, you can go to the Brain database up on the Logos Media website. It's up there, linked at the top here. You just click on the Brain right here, and you can go right to the Brain database page. And so it'll show up down here on the bottom, or at least if it's working, it will. There it goes. And you can just type in right here, for instance, Humphrey. And so this article that's going to come up under Humphrey Osmond, under this search here, and you can also click on this one up here, and that'll bring you to a better link. But Humphrey Osmond, he was Aldous Huxley's ding-ding personal doctor and a key player in MKULTRA. We can see here that he was in charge of MKULTRA subproject 111 and 47. And so under him, and you can find there's a PDF of him in there written by Abram Hoffer, who is another person that I've exposed in the Entheogens What's in a Name article. But under Humphrey Osmond, everybody, you'll find this PDF here. He looks like a vampire right there. This PDF here about Humphrey Osmond, written by Abram Hoffer, and it's really a who's who of those who were involved with the Canadian Saskatchewan MKULTRA research. It really names everybody up there, and some others that I hadn't even seen. And I don't remember who sent me this article. It's been a few years since somebody sent it to me, but it's been in the brain database under Adrenochrome. So we finally got to it and read through it, and it really lays out a lot of the research tying who's who. And again, the key players in it are the exact same key players that I exposed in my Entheogens What's in a Name article up on and you can find that, go down the front page, and it's right down here toward the bottom. But I highly recommend people check that out, because you can see how they marketed psychedelics, entheogens, all these different words to us. But so Humphrey Osmond, he became the director of the hospital up in Saskatchewan, the Weyburn Hospital up there. And it appears that it really looks like they were using mental patients in the psychiatric wards to create fear responses in the patients, to create a flood of adrenaline so that they could likely bleed these people to create their adrenaline, which they would then use to turn into adrenochrome. And the process, they were using silver and other interesting things, which comes up in some of the alchemical stuff now. So for those of you who aren't aware and haven't read that article, so Humphrey Osmond was MKULTRA subproject 47 and 11. Osmond also worked for and I'll just show the database on screen here. Osmond, excuse me while I go back to that. He also worked at the he also was working with the Esalen Institute. He was at the Macy Foundation conferences, which were a key part of the CIA's MKULTRA program. And again, he was the personal doctor for Aldous Huxley. And he was also working with the Huxley Institute for Biosocial Research. Ding, ding, ding. And, of course, this institute, I just found out today researching this, was originally the Association for Schizophrenic Research or something like that, and they renamed it. Let's see. Let me just find that here in these notes here. Sorry, I didn't have a chance to get that into the brain database. But so the Huxley Institute for Biosocial Research, let's see. I'm just looking for the note here. The American Schizophrenia Association. So that's what it was called first, and then they renamed it with the Huxley family's permission. Of course, I showed in the article Entheogens What's in a Name that Julian Huxley was also working with that and was part of a major scandalous paper that was published through that organization. But when we go through all of this, we can begin to see a lot of the key players. Dr. Ewan Cameron, of course, is the most famous CIA MKULTRA doctor out of that school, and he is right there in the center of all of these guys. And so let's see here. And we did a show on him a couple of years ago with a former co-host. But again, he was a key CIA and MI6 doctor, and he's, in charge of the World Psychiatry Association. He headed MKULTRA Subproject 68, and he worked with a lot of these people, did a lot of these human experiments, which we begin to see flushing out when we start to look at the adrenochrome research and the adrenochrome theory. Now, it ties directly into vampirism, it appears. Interestingly, in this paper here that somebody sent me the other day, I think it may have been Robert who sent that to me, so thank you, Robert. It is the adrenochrome hypothesis of schizophrenia revisited from April 2001, if you can see that there. And so it's written by John Smithies, whom, of course, is the one of the people involved in Team 1 that I exposed in Entheogens What's in a Name. And They even have Humphrey Osmond doing some of the first experiments, apparently on himself, of the adrenochrome research. And then, so these guys are all the key guys. They're talking about Hoffer reported that adrenochrome, the auto-oxidative product of adrenaline, produced psychological changes in one normal subject. Of course, the normal subject is Osmond. Of course, he's not normal. He was a megalomaniac and psychopath helping the CIA, who is an experienced subject in experiments. Okay, yeah, in CIA experiments. He gave the most detailed first-hand account that we currently possess of its effects. His reaction was characterized by profound introversion, bizarre ideation, and minor visual aberrations. We suggested, therefore, that some cases of schizophrenia might result from the abnormal production of adrenochrome in the brain. And so other products of adrenaline oxidation were differentially present. All 8 subjects were given 30 milligrams of adrenochrome and developed a psychotic reaction. So here we see these people who are, and they always use this cover. They're supposedly trying to cure schizophrenia, etc., but they're always causing it, and that's, you have to read between the lines. These people are all working on the CIA's MKULTRA project. They're not doing it for our benefit, folks. They're doing it to cause schizophrenia in us, and to cause our fall. But one interesting thing about this paper by John Smithies is that even the famous Dr. Stanislav Grof, whom I interviewed about 9 years ago on the show, and he considered my interview with him to be the best of his career, which I've since figured out that he was part of all of this. Well, he was doing adrenochrome research in Czechoslovakia before he came to the United States, helping the CIA, apparently, and the Esalen Institute promote various things, and he's the one who came up with the holotropic breathwork theory, etc. But, I interviewed this guy years ago, not knowing that he was a part of all of this. And so he actually shows up in the footnotes, in the endnotes of this paper right there. You can see Stanislav Grof's name show up. I don't know if that's going to come in focus or not. There it goes. Stanislav Grof right there. So, here we have the same players going through this blood ritual. Adrenochrome is a product of getting people to have an adrenaline reaction to something, usually some traumatic event where you flood the body with adrenaline, and then you bleed them, and then you create the oxidative products of the adrenaline coming out of this. So Humphrey Osmond, let's just bring the brain database back up here again. He was, working with John Smithies. John Smithies was MKULTRA Subproject 8, which we can see down here. Again, he's another MKULTRA doctor that we've long since identified. And, so Adrenochrome Theory Storming Heaven, page 25, Cultural Cold War, page 69 by Francis Donner Saunders. So this is where these people show up, and you can just, slowly track these guys out. But we have Dr. Abram Hoffer over here, who's MKULTRA Subproject 11, and that is with Dr. Humphrey Osmond and Dr. Hans Eisnick. And here we go again, ladies and gentlemen. Ding, ding, ding. Leonard George Holden Huxley. So, this is sorry to hit so many right out the gate here. And then we have, oh boy. So it gets pretty dark here. Do you want to jump in for a minute here before we get into something really gruesome like Hunter S. Thompson?
Well, so that's very interesting that we're now starting to link these mental hospitals to these other groups as well that we've been researching. I'm wondering what else will turn up if we start uncovering certain people's involvement in all the worldwide mental hospitals. Wonder if we would find some really shady stuff going on. This is some dark stuff, and we know they, a lot of these experiments that have been taking place are based on trauma-based mind control. A lot of tactics that we keep seeing pop up in the CIA tactics and MI6, all of this. It would not surprise me if all these mental hospitals were linked in some way to a deeper, darker conspiracy with blood and trauma-based mind control and adrenochrome.
I 100% agree with you on that. And, it gets really dark when you look at this stuff. You can see, this article here, for instance, this one on Humphrey Osmond that I had up earlier by Abram Hoffer. This, like I said, it's really the who's who of who is involved in the Saskatchewan MKULTRA experiments up there, which, of course, all of that is pinned on Abram Hoffer. But you know what? A few weeks ago, we had Jana Bitzer on the Logos Roundtable show to discuss Alcoholics Anonymous. Now, interestingly, all of these same people, well, here's Abram Hoffer right here. Well, look who's just over here to the left, one of his friends. There's Bill Wilson. And Bill Wilson is in this article. Bill Wilson was given adrenochrome, and it was tested on him to see his reaction. He didn't care for it, is what they say in this article. But we see here again Bill Wilson tied to Al Hubbard doing adrenochrome experiments. Now, I did find that quote from Al Hubbard on the tank, or at least one of them that I was talking about last week, so I'll read that in just a minute. And we see Abram Hoffer, Humphrey Osmond, Tim Leary, L. Ron Hubbard. These are all key MKUltra people. They're all in red there. But let me see here. So let me just see what this is here, if we have anything good here. Probably some MKUltra file there. But anyway, just one of Bill Wilson's original documents from 1961 to Timothy Leary, Center for Research in Personality. Of course, they're always doing social engineering research, so he's tied in with Timothy Leary here doing this kind of stuff. We already know Leary was an admitted CIA agent since at least 62, I suspect much before then. But Bill Wilson is in this same article discussing his adrenochrome studies with these other guys in here. It's like it doesn't get any better than this. And for those who doubted the ties with Bill Wilson with MKUltra and the occult, go into the database and pull up this PDF, and I've put it in a number of these guys' links in there so that you can find it in a few of them. But when you see how they're all interconnected, you begin to see the plan here, and how, even AA, here it is, because of Bill's interest in AA, many doctors became powerful advocates of the orthomolecular medicine. The AA International Headquarters rejected Bill's ideas because, not being a doctor, he had no right to talk about vitamins. To help him, the Huxley Institute of Biosocial Research, ding ding, gave him a small grant to pay for secretarial and other expenses. So here the Huxley family and this American Schizophrenic Association that's being run by Abram Hoffer and Smithies and Osmond and, with Julian and Aldous Huxley involved, they are funding Bill Wilson. That's right there, ladies and gentlemen. I've got it highlighted right there. I'm not making that up. So if that comes in focus there. But, it just goes to show you that, these guys are, there it is. These guys are all tied together in this whole thing. He's working directly with all of these CIA personnel on this stuff, working on all of these different MKUltra sub-projects, and this is, again, Team 1 that I exposed in the Entheogens What's in a Name article. So now another key player that constantly shows up in adrenochrome stuff is this very sick guy. He has a background sort of similar to William S. Burroughs, and he likes to kill people. William S. Burroughs was famous for killing a number of people, including his wife, and he was a pedophile down in South America, killed some people down there, at least one or two. But this guy, Hunter S. Thompson, shows up, and Hunter S. Thompson on the David Letterman show back in 1988, he's on the David Letterman show. They're talking about how he likes to murder people, and I'll just let people go find that. Hunter S. Thompson on Letterman. There's this other guy here who's put together a video exposing this guy. In this video here, Hunter S. Thompson exposed hashtag Pizzagate. He talks about how Hunter S. Thompson tried to hire him for $100,000 to make a snuff film, and then he goes into some of the details, which are pretty gruesome, about what these guys were doing in the snuff films, etc. And here's Hunter S. Thompson shoots Woody Creek woman, but he's in this video bragging about how he likes to kill people. Now, of course, he showed up at Frank Olson's house after the Frank Olson murder by the CIA, which, of course, Frank Olson apparently was going to expose a lot of this crap that the CIA was doing. But this guy shows up in that. A murderer, he admits that he likes to murder people. That's one of his favorite things. This is the kind of psychopath, megalomaniac we're discussing here. And then you can also get into this clip here, which is, of course, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. And this is video unavailable. Shocker. But actually, here, we have it over here. We can see him, this is the scene where they're doing the adrenochrome, and this is a real thing. Okay, so this would basically be a scene with him and Johnny Depp doing vampire drugs, and of course Johnny Depp was also tied in with Pizzagate from what it appears in some of the research that's come out. People can search that on YouTube, etc., to see how he ties into all of this stuff. But this is supposed to be Hunter Thompson here, high on adrenochrome, wigging out and acting crazy and everything. So, this is what they're doing, apparently. So this adrenochrome stuff ties in with the vampirism and the bloodletting, and we've since figured out that it appears to tie into abortions, into the blood banks, into the old bloodletting rituals that they used to do for curing sickness and whatnot. But anyway, I'm going to pass it over to you, because there's just, I'm going too fast here. I'm going a million miles an hour through all these details on this stuff.
Oh, I think you're doing a good job. But yeah, so, just kind of a caveat before I start to mention some of these other things. Guys, you really want to, before you go down any of these rabbit holes, you really got to be, let's say, emotionally mature. You really got to make sure that you don't let the fear get to you. If you're the type of person that kind of, gets real scared or has nightmares and stuff like that, go and, do the self work that you need to do to face your fears and stuff before you get into this stuff. I've had some personal experiences with this stuff back in 2009, where I first started learning about these so-called Illuminati, Freemasonic rituals and stuff, and started having, a really hard time, wrapping my head around how sick people have to be to do some of this stuff. And when you start to realize this stuff is real, it can be emotionally taxing, so I would just say, before you get too involved with this stuff, I've had some friends that I've tried to explain some stuff to, and it hit them way too hard and they couldn't handle it. So, just kind of as a warning, just make sure you're mature enough to handle some of this stuff.
That's for sure.
Yeah. Now, one thing, last time we went into just a little bit about Zacharias Sebi, or Sevi, however you pronounce his name. I think we probably should hit more on that. A lot of people were,
Sabotage Zevi, however you pronounce it.
yeah, because he's a huge player in this whole thing. You know, when you go back through history, trying to find the root of where we went wrong here, his name comes up quite a bit in my research, and one reason why I'd like to talk more about him is even on the topic of psychic vampirism, which is kind of like in an emotional type of vampirism that I'm sure everybody's experienced at some point in their life with people, with relationships, with something where you know, it almost feels like somebody's feeding off of you, feeding off of your energy.
Succubi.
Yeah, a lot of people will notice, like if you start to pay attention, you'll hear certain people say things like, well, I feed off of other people's energy. You know, when they stand up in front of a crowd, I feed off of the crowd. It's like, did you ever think about like what that entails? One thing is, if you don't have your own energy source, your own, I would say it comes along when you do the self work, when you start to get your own source of intellectual and emotional energy that doesn't require you to feed off somebody else like a drug. Um, then you start to realize there's a big cross correlation here between uh, emotional vampires, psychic vampires, and the blood. Let me say, I'll get a little philosophical for just a second here. On a level where it all translates to throughout history to groups of people who let me just say it like this. If you think about banking itself is kind of like a vampiristic type of behavior. If you're charging interest, like usury, we've talked about usury in the past, right? So if there are groups of people that are living emotionally as vampires, and they also are translating over into business and you know, across all fronts, that's the interesting correlation that I'm starting to realize here. So banking can be likened to a sort of leeching off of people, right? So if you really think about it, you know, that's why usury was illegal in the past. You know, the church banned this evil practice, and it was really similar to the same problem that we have on emotional fronts. It's that there's groups and tribes of people, right, who are living as vampires off of other groups of people. And so we can trace this back to the history, through the history of banking. And the interesting thing is you start to notice a relationship between these really sick people like Zacharias Sebi and the bankers, the Rothschilds, all, you know, a lot of the, you know, people that we talk about a lot of times here, which also ties in really well with what we were talking about last show with the Romanov family. So the Romanov family, according to Anatoly Fomenko, is where the bankers, the banking bacchanalian cults, they were the ones who turned into the rabbinic line, which, you know, so the rabbinic line were the ones in charge during the empire of the money. They were in charge of the money, and they were also the scribes. That's how our history got screwed up, and that's how they got into banking. Okay, so enter the huge turning point in our recent history, which is Zacharias Sevi in 1666. Okay, now this guy decided to flip upside down the Ten Commandments, and so thou shalt not kill turned into thou shalt kill, etc. And you know, he became a messiah that all the different tribes were following. The Judaic tribes, the rabbinic tribes, were following him as the Messiah. So it's interesting to study this guy because he really pushes forward this new way of Zionism. This is right where you start to see this Zionism, and hidden in with that, he starts advocating for incest. He starts advocating for sacrifices, uh, probably human, most likely baby sacrifices, and they like young blood. You'll start to realize the younger the blood has some significance for them in healing and becoming young again. Kind of like this idea of the fountain of youth, which you see in a lot of vampire movies and TV shows, reoccurring monster movies. Like you'll see the same theme reoccur where they're trying. It's almost like there's something there. They're kind of metaphorical in a sense with harvesting energy and harvesting blood and all this stuff, but also ritualistically, a lot of this stuff probably was happening back in 1666. We at least know that Jacob Frank, who was Shabbatai Zevi's predecessor, who, so then you can actually go read a bunch of Jacob Frank's information on rituals that he advocated to do, which is the root of what we're talking about with this vampiristic human ritual stuff. And I mentioned to watch that documentary before. It really ties it all in. It's called Jewish Ritualistic Murder. If you want to watch that, it's very dark. Like I said, make sure you're mature before you go watch some of this stuff. But that's what is interesting to me, is the psychic vampirism and the idea that you can leech off of somebody else's energy is really tied in hardcore to the idea of lending people interest and living off of a host society like a parasite. So, that's a huge thing that once you start to, I mean, obviously people have put that together, but if you think about the implications of this, this stuff starts to get pretty sick and disturbing. Now, one of the things that's interesting once you learn about the Shabbatai Zevi stuff, you start to realize some of this stuff has been taking place in the Catholic Church. When did it start? Well, it started when the Catholic Church started to become compromised. You can do some research on the Rothschilds' infiltration of the Vatican. When they started putting a bunch of money in, they started getting a bunch of their quote unquote black popes. And I've talked to, there's a whole bunch of interviews all over YouTube about the Catholic Church becoming completely Zionist after this starts to take place. Coincident, what was it? The Armenian genocide happens. It's the Young Turks are tied right into the Shabbatai Zevi. Shabbatai Zevi is this Turkish, guy.
Yeah, and you gotta question any group that intentionally calls themselves the Young Turks, whether they were a bunch of pseudo-intellectual, movie actors and actresses from the 50s and 60s, or so-called YouTube news reporters today. You couldn't possibly pick a more psychopathic name. And of course, there are these, staunch, truth-hating liberals and whatnot. And in my opinion, excuse me, I had to add the caveat there.
Yeah, so we talk, sometimes you'll hear us say left-hand path versus right-hand path. One thing you'll realize if you kind of put the big picture together, you start to see, especially if you understand the RK gene selection stuff, which I recommend looking into, you'll realize the left-hand path is the reason why they want to flip and invert everything. The reason why is because in life, pretty much everything is based on competition. And they don't like that it's based on competition. So they want to flip it upside down. And that's why you pretty much always see communism, socialism, and all these ideas come from the left-hand path. And the reason why is because they can't compete. So they choose to lie, cheat, and steal. And
Yeah,
that's their survival
when you
mechanism.
can't be honest, you lie, cheat, and steal, and screw everybody else over, and then you sell everything that you're doing. You sell all of your mind control and trickery and everything that you're doing, all of the degeneracy, all of the iniquitous behavior and everything. You sell that as freedom rather than true freedom. So it's all an inversion and a bait and switch tactic. But people need to go in and especially read the New Testament so that you grasp what the left hand versus the right hand path are. And then the middle path, Revelation 3:15-16, exposes as vomit, and it will be spewed out of God's mouth, because it's like, don't be a moderate. Either pick Satanism or pick truth, but don't be a moderate, or God will spew you out of his mouth. And so once you get this stuff, you can begin to figure out what's going on in society. The trolls are already active in there. It's like fucking pathetic.
So the thing with the Catholic Church that you start to realize is after they were infiltrated by these, Sabbatai Zevi taught a lot of his followers and descendants that the best way to infiltrate is to act like you're converted to either the religious group or the empire or whatever. Just they act like they converted secretly in their own behind closed doors. They're still doing the same practices this Bacchanalian cult has been doing. This cult of Mithra has been doing all along. So they infiltrate the various religions. They infiltrate into Islam. All of a sudden, Islam, there's all kinds of different books in Islam being edited so that you get these the different sects, and then you get the Christian Zionist movement gets infiltrated, and then you start to see reoccurring patterns, and then they blame Christians and they blame the Muslims for certain things that was this Zionist Kabbalistic type of ritualistic behavior we're talking about. Now that is how you explain how all of a sudden in the Catholic Church you get a rise of pedophilia. But how it fits into what we're talking about here is in Spain, all of a sudden, right after the Catholic Church gets infiltrated, thousands and thousands of reports of babies going missing in churches starts to get reported. And the lid gets blown off that there's actually child trafficking going on. And that's probably still going on to this day when we're looking at all the kids on the milk boxes, etc. But one way that they do it that a lot of people don't know, it's really sick. They'll you go to a hospital, the hospital, you give birth, all of a sudden they take your baby away, put it in an incubator. You come back, or they come back and say, sorry, your baby didn't make it. And of course, they take it. This is, there's certain evidence out there. What I'm saying is circumstantial. I realize that, but look into it. This is a really sick and disturbing thing that's probably still taking place. A lot of people think a lot of these rituals stopped taking place, but unfortunately, I really think a lot of the child trafficking, stuff that we see going on in there's been several people that have gotten caught, and for some reason it always gets brushed under the rug, and that links over to Pizzagate. And I think Pizzagate's probably been covered. Most people understand what that's all about. We probably don't need to get into that too deep, but it should be at least mentioned in a topic about vampirism, and who knows what's really going on. But yeah, this is, like I said, some sick, disturbing stuff. But You got anything to say about that?
Oh, I was just going to say somebody brought up, kids. That's a baby goat, right? And I was just showing on screen in the database. People can go in there and pull some of this stuff up. But so they have us calling our children kids to mock us, and then it's also a kid is also known as a faggot, and then kidding is hoaxing or playing a joke or a prank. So you have all of these related themes in here. And then look, there's Mirjana Abramovic right there, one of the people behind a lot of this stuff. But yeah, so there somebody else was talking in the thread just a minute ago about eating raw meat, et cetera, and looking into that as well. But Muslims and Jews cutting baby genitals, especially the male genitals, which we discussed a little bit previously in the previous episode on this. But and then doing facials and whatnot with the foreskins. It's all of this just hideous, hideous stuff. As as if half of those in the country don't already know how hideous it is. Some woman actually tried to argue last show that female circumcision wasn't near as bad, and it was so innocent, and she's got to protect the children in Africa when when half the population undergoes this this crud in the United States. But they, people don't even grasp how dark and sinister it really is, and how deep it goes. Way back at the very beginning of the show, in the first 3 months of the show, I did an episode or two on circumcision and how bad it really is and how it leads to violence and all kinds of stuff. But, that's a bit of a segue there. I wanted to go back a second because I realized when reading this article on Humphrey Osmond, the Memoriam article, from Abram Hoffer, that they are discussing, or no, is it this one? Sorry. I think it's this one here. Yeah, this one is from John Smithies, and this is 2001. I published that Entheogens What's in a Name article in 2014. And, in all of the books, Acid Dreams, all these nonsense CIA disinformation books out there, they try to play up that psychotomimetic was a drug that was disused and it was a bad word, even though that cover up that Humphrey Osmond created the word, and that it was their team with Abram Hoffer and John Smithies, et cetera, that created that word. But this article was published in 2001, and we see it's written by John Smithies, and we can see right there next to my finger, if it comes into focus there, we can see right there, is it going to do it? Oh, come on. There it goes, that they're using the word psychotomimetic, which is schizophrenia causing, or it's to cause or mimic psychosis. And so, it's, this is what, like 40 years after they pretended to stop using the word, and, 15 years after, what's his name? Oh, goodness. Let me just check here. Acid Dreams. What's his name? Sorry. Martin Lee published Acid Dreams and the whole nonsense theory. Of course, Martin Lee, that book is a complete disinformation, as I've exposed in my article, Spies in Academic Clothing. If those of you who still haven't read it, that's going to be part of this to show how they do all of this. But, Humphrey Osmond, he shows up in all of this. And I was talking in the last episode about a tank that was filled with gas of some kind, and I've read somewhere else, I believe, that the tank was filled possibly with adrenochrome. This one doesn't say it, but this admits that Al Hubbard, OSS, recruited by Alan Dulles' team, pardoned for rum running if he helped the CIA peddle drugs instead. Also sold and dealt in uranium. And let's see, Humphrey Osmond is the same doctor we exposed a few weeks ago on the episode about Alcoholics Anonymous, which I already mentioned. But Al Hubbard worked with Bill Wilson and Humphrey Osmond and all these guys. But so here's this quote. Laura Huxley met Captain Hubbard for the first time at her and her husband's Hollywood Hills home in the early 1960s. He showed up for lunch one afternoon, and he brought with him a portable tank filled with a gas of some kind. He offered some to us, she recalls, but we said we didn't care for any, so we put it down. I don't think this is, oh, shoot. I just, what do they fill the balloons at? Not, laughing gas at all the rave parties and Grateful Dead. Huh?
Whippets, nitrogen.
Yeah, exactly. Whippets, but not nitrogen. What's the other one? Oh, goodness.
Nitrous oxide.
Nitrous oxide, thank you. I'm not sure. I don't think it's Whippets because he comes out of the bathroom, she says, but we didn't care for any. He put it down. He went into the bathroom with the tank after lunch, breathed into it for about 10 seconds. It must have been very concentrated because he came out revitalized and very jubilant, talking about a vision he'd seen of the Virgin Mary. Now, so the other day I mentioned also watching True Blood, and in season 1, episode 7, they're talking about this blood ritual, and you notice when, I read all of the Bible quotes the other day, and if you go back and listen to part 1, you'll notice that all of those citations dealt with bread. Well, in season 1, episode 7 of True Blood, it's about 40 minutes in or so into the episode, they start doing a ritual, and the woman says that it is part of the original true sacrament. Of course, that would be the Satanist sacrament, and then, Jesus comes along trying to stop all of these human sacrifices and, sacrifices himself and says, drink this in remembrance of me, live in truth, stop all of the human sacrifices and all of that stuff. So it was supposed to be an end to all of that, but it never came about. Hubbard is also the guy now. His Captain Al Hubbard, he was also named the Johnny Appleseed of LSD. He had exclusive rights from Sandoz Laboratories in Switzerland for distribution of all North American LSD sales, so that was all going through him. And he also worked under Dr. Willis Harriman at SRI, which, of course, is another CIA front that we've exposed extensively. And then, oh boy, we haven't even gotten to the ambrosia topic yet. Have you looked into ambrosia yet?
A little bit a while ago, but you had a lot more grammar on that.
I don't think I do have more grammar on it. If you want to hit it, I can check. Yeah, I don't really have anything. We need to flesh that out on my side. So whatever you have, we can throw that up.
I'll need a little bit of time to go through my notes on ambrosia.
And, I just wanted to say thank you to all of you who are supporting the show tonight. Thank you, Reese. Thank you, Polygonal. Thank you, Minor Threats. You threw up like $15. Polygonals made a couple dollars. Lex Van Man, thank you. Justin Kelly, thank you, all of you. And they're asking, some of them ask if we can ever get to the bottom of the flat Earth thing. Let's see. One of these days we might do it. It's a tough topic. The thing is, it's causes such a knee-jerk reaction in people. Polygonal says, grateful to be here. This is a rare place in the world. And Minor Threat says, think about all the children who go missing every year in the U.S. alone. Those who cover milk cartons, that's probably where they disappear. They're probably used in these adrenochrome type things. Now, somebody else taught me a new word this week, pedivore, which is the cross between a pedophile and a carnivore. They eat the victims after they sacrifice them. So, that's apparently another sick direction that I'm not sure I want to look into much further. A lot of this stuff is just so dark and depressing when you look at it. It really wears down on your soul to even know about it, to even, do an episode on the show. I also wanted to say, everybody, please subscribe to the channel and please thumb up the episode, etc. Of course, there's always, trolls out there trying to thumb down and, stir up trouble in the chats and stuff who don't have anything better to do with their lives. But, please subscribe to the channel. Please thumb up. Please support the show. Anything you can do to help with the research that we do, we really appreciate. And anyway, I'll toss it back over to you, Caleb.
All right, so ambrosia, the nectar of the gods. So Wikipedia will tell you that it's an ancient Greek myth, and right off the bat, I'll tell you that if you look into flamenco, he makes the case, and I would say a very good case, that the Greeks were not ancient. They were actually, the word Greek is just a phonetic of Christos, a Christian. So the ancient Greeks, in my opinion, and if you're interested in more grammar on that, I'd be willing to provide you with primary citations from flamenco that kind of swayed me to have this idea. So the nectar of the gods, being ancient Greek, is probably a reflection of medieval, um, of a medieval version of Christianity. You'll notice how similar a lot of the ideas are. And if you look into the etymology of it, the concept of an immortality drink is attested in at least two Indo-European areas, Greek and Sanskrit. By the way, Sanskrit is Saint-Skrit and is Christian. It was not an ancient language, according to Anatoly Fomenko. Sanskrit came out of a Slavic derivative.
Saint script.
Exactly. Yep. It was apostolus, the apostles and the crusaders who traveled east to India, brought with them the language that they gave. They were called the Aryans. And anyways, that's a huge
That's a whole other show.
segue. Yeah. That's a whole nother show. We'd love to hit some of that stuff in the future, but for now, I'll stay on topic. So both of the words that come from the etymology that lead you to ambrosia is a drink or a food that the gods use to achieve immortality. Okay, it's kind of like it even has certain ties to mana as well. But this nectar of the gods could have something to do, this ambrosia, that they link it to a lot of the stories that are actually medieval stories, reflections of medieval stories that got pushed back into ancient, quote unquote, ancient times to cover up their tracks, to cover up history of what was really going on. So presumably, Dionysus, the wine of Dionysus comes up a lot in the myths, which if you look deeper into a lot of these, where these myths come from, a lot of in the medieval times, could the ambrosia have something to do with the Bacchanalian cults that we keep talking about, drinking the blood? Do these people think that they're going to get immortal life from blood? It fits in with the adrenochrome really well. There's even mentions, some modern ethnomycologists such as Danny Staples identify ambrosia with the hallucinogenic mushroom Amanita muscaria. It was the food of the gods, the ambrosia. So like you've already talked about many times on your show, the mana, the soma, the, all of this stuff.
And I was telling you, I just want to interrupt you right here, because I was telling you right before the show we were discussing about this, and I mentioned, and we're gonna tie all of this into the Aztecs here pretty shortly, but I mentioned to you that I suspected that the plant drugs, the so-called entheogens, the suggestogens, are a red herring to the ambrosia, the blood, the adrenochrome sacrament. And being in ethnobotany for many years and studying plant substances and how cultures use them, I wasn't looking at blood rituals and whatnot. Obviously, right at the very beginning of the podcast, I had Professor, come on, Mr. Kanema. The guy that died. Oh, man. Oh, goodness. of course, right when I go to say it, I can't find him. But oh, now it's going to drive me crazy if I don't find it.
It'll come back.
Yeah, so geez, he was such a popular doctor too. But anyway, he was at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. He was a famous anthropologist there, but he did all of the research on the Kanema, the dark shamanism, and the blood sacrifice rituals way early on in the show, and he said he didn't want to go any further because it was so dark he couldn't take it any further. And thank you, it was just too dark for him to go there. And I just wanted to, say thank you to Tuba Lizards, Polygonal Construction, Sanchez, and Barre for donating some money for dinner tonight. I mentioned I could use a steak dinner, which I'm desperately needing some steak. So thank you for that so much. I really appreciate it. Now, so going back to this, we have, and I'm just going to, before I get into the Aztec stuff, what I want to mention, and I have a note here to talk about this, is in this article on Humphrey Osmond, written by Abram Hoffer, there's a whole bunch of coincidences, and that's on the third page there. If that comes in up here, it's all these coincidences. They've got 8 of them up there. Goodness, if I can do that in reverse and get it in focus. Anyway, there it goes. Woo! There we go. But if we read Spies in Academic Clothing, what we see there is, he says, these are the main events which came together at our first meeting, an amazing series of coincidences. Well, for those of you who may remember, I talked about the coincidence theory or the synchronicity theory and kind of made fun of the CIA for constantly using that. But they have this whole coincidence theory about how all of these people came together in here to begin to study the adrenochrome theory. Number one, a government led by Premier T. Douglas interested in modernizing the mental hospitals and treating their patients better. Wink, wink. Oh, there's always some loving thing they want to do. 2, my presence with the peculiar background, my PhD in vitamins, and my ignorance of psychiatry. 3, Osmond's presence with his unique hypothesis and interest in hallucinogens and the negative reaction he found in England. And that's probably the negative reaction that Leary talks about, that I wrote about in Spies in Academic Clothing, where he sends, oh, shoot. Now I'm forgetting all their names. Good grief. He sends, what's his name, over to England because they're not having the spiritual experience with psychedelics. Oh, goodness, I hate it when I forget people's names. That drives me absolutely crazy. And so let me just see if I can find it here, because I know it's in the database and it'll probably pop up. I know it starts with H or something like that, but anyway, I don't see it popping up. And, of course, it always happens right when you need it, so that sucks. But anyway, he sends them back to England because they're not having the spiritual experience, and they need to go back and market the spiritual experience to from psychedelics and LSD to everybody in England. And let's see. Okay, so it's Hollingshead. Goodness, Michael Hollingshead. And Timothy actually gives him marching orders, wink, wink. Of course, they're all agents, so when you get that they're all agents working for the CIA and the Harvard Department of Social Relations, etc., he says, Tim came to see me on the day of my departure. He was going to join me in London in January 1966, which gave him 3 months to set the scene for his arrival. The idea was to rent the Albert Hall, or Alpert Hall as Tim called it, for a psychedelic jamboree. We would get the Beatles. Of course, these are college students at Harvard, and of course they had contacts to the Beatles and Rolling Stones in England, right? And we would get the Beatles or the Stones to perform, invite the artists, and as the climax of events, introduce Tim as the high priest. Of course, this is all a setup, social engineering. They're propping Tim up as the spiritual guru. Somebody wrote me last week, they couldn't figure out why. Well, why was Tim fired, and why were the drugs outlawed? If it's the CIA marketing, you got to ask yourself, why did you mean Tim Leary himself go before Congress, which I've exposed in these articles many times, and asked for these drugs to be outlawed like LSD? So, taking a piece of paper from his pocket, Tim said, "Here, these are your marching orders, your instructions." And then he said, and then skipping down, it's like Hollingshead expedition to London, 1965-66, spiritual path and emotional development. Of course, this is all backward. Of course, what they're doing is breaking Christianity and living in truth. They want people to follow their CIA psychedelic or suggestogen religion so that they can mind control everybody and break up the family and everything that we see going on now. To introduce London to the interpretation and applications and methods developed by and learned by Michael Hollingshead, of course, under Timothy Leary and Henry A. Murray, et cetera, under the Harvard Psychology Department at Harvard. And he says, a yoga of expression by Michael Hollingshead plan. No specific program of expression can be specified in advance. The yoga may include Tran Art Gallery Bookstore. Tran Art, okay. Weekly psychedelic reviews, literature. So you can see they're marketing all of this crap. It's all done intentionally by the Social Relations Department at Harvard. Lectures, questions and answers, Tran Art demonstrations, radio, TV, newspaper, magazine, educational programs. So, this is just an organic grassroots hippie movement, right? They're going to have the radio, TV, and newspapers and magazines all publishing their stuff, right? I mean, that's when you're having an organic grassroots movement with a bunch of hippies, that's what happens, right? All of the radio, TV, newspapers come out and they promote it for you, right? And then they talk about how it's all suppressed. This is actually in the Entheogens What's in a Name article, not in the Spies and Academic Clothing article, but you can see what I was just reading right there. For those of you who want to read that more, and of course, Dr. Henry A. Murray, Dr. Thomas Chew, B.F. Skinner, George Estabrooks, were all involved in that department's CIA MKULTRA program, and of course, Dr. Timothy Leary, Dr. Ralph Metzner, Dr. Richard Price, who went on to found the Esalen Institute, and Dr. James Fadiman, who was the very last one to do legal LSD experiments in the U.S., were all in there, as well as one of their most famous victims, Dr. Theodore Kaczynski, who became the Unabomber, and tried to kill them all for what they did to him at Harvard. If we can believe, the official storyline, I need to look into that more. So, here we have, just going off of this, he's talking about, going over to England to sell the message in this official thing. And then, let's see. Professor D. Hutchian, who had studied adrenochrome, no medical school, no one to tell us what we could do, at least 400 miles away from the nearest medical school. Ding, ding, ding. Okay, so they're 400 miles away from the nearest medical school out in the middle of Saskatchewan doing human experiments on adrenochrome and all of this stuff. And it's the same team who came up with psychotomimetic, psychedelic, Hoffer came up with hallucinogen. And so this is the same group that came up with all of the most common words. Of course, I've renamed them to suggestogens so that people are more clear on what these substances really do. And then total support for G.D. McArcher, Director of Psychedelic Services Branch, So these are all the coincidences that the CIA put together for all these people to be there, but it's always the same nonsense storyline. It's all just coincidence, wink, wink. But the adrenochrome hypothesis of schizophrenia can be written as two simple equations: adrenaline to adrenochrome, adrenochrome to schizophrenia. And they have a little diagram right there showing their little hypothesis. And of course, they are selling schizophrenia to the masses to screw up everybody's heads. They're not, you don't peddle sex, drugs, and rock and roll to the masses and then, are actually really concerned about curing people of schizophrenia and whatnot. They're really trying to create and dispensate as much schizophrenia as possible to create the fall, to get people caught up in all kinds of crazy and radical behavior. So, it's just always the same MKUltra cover-up tactics. I hope the CIA comes up with some new tactics, because this stuff is just so worn out and beaten dead and dry. It's like, come on, guys. You guys are so impotent. So, now, I want to get into the ties for a moment to the Aztecs, because this stuff, anyway, I'm just going to read this, because when you get the blood thing, and then you get what I was just talking about, the psychedelics being a red herring to adrenochrome, well, check this out. So this is from Diego Duran, History of the Indies of New Spain, page 407. This was published in, 1610 or 1615 or so. And then... So they're going to tell you that it's that these death cults, and the Aztecs were running a huge death cult, and they've sold it to us as this lovey-dovey New Age religion. And, Maria Sabina, and you just, Jan Irvin, you're just so ignorant, because, the plant drugs, they were there before the CIA. And the CIA, and these other cultures and people could have never used this stuff for bad purposes. So this is Diego Duran. This is over 4 centuries old, or roughly 4 centuries old. When the festivities had ended, Montezuma seated himself in the supreme place, the divine seat, the place of the gods, and the war captives were brought out. All of them were sacrificed in honor of his coronation, a painful ceremony, and it was a pathetic thing to see these wretches as victims of Montezuma. It had become as common among these people to sacrifice men on feast days as it is for us to kill lambs or cattle in the slaughterhouse. I am not exaggerating. Of course, Gordon Wasson in Soma and all of his books, he had to omit this entire first paragraph because it didn't jive with his CIA, PR man for a J.P. Morgan bank agenda. And then he says, there were days in which 2,000, 3,000, 5,000, or 8,000 men were sacrificed. Their flesh was eaten, and the banquet was prepared with it. A banquet was prepared with it after the hearts had been offered to the devil. When the sacrifice was finished, and the steps and courtyard were bathed in human blood, everyone went to eat raw mushrooms. With this food, they went out of their minds and were in a worse state than if they had drunk a great quantity of wine. They became so inebriated and witless that many of them took their own lives with their own hands. Under the strong influences of these mushrooms, they saw visions and had revelations about the future, since the devil spoke to them in their drunken madness. So now we begin to see the mixing of the adrenochrome. So they're causing fear. They're causing major adrenochrome, but and then I'm going to cover more of what Gordon Wasson, the con artist, says here in a second about all this. He tries to play the whole thing down. But we see now that it's not just the mushrooms causing the inebriation, it's the blood and the all of the human flesh and human hearts, etc., that they're eating there. And so such passages, and this is Gordon Wasson. Oh, man. So Gordon Wasson, such passages in the Chronicles of the Aztecs astonish us. The number of human sacrifices are set forth in detail, the way in which they are keyed to a religious calendar. Keyed to a religious calendar. By golly. The variety of methods used in the taking of lives and the victims, many of them cruel, taxing belief, and perhaps strangest of all, the presence of their deaths on the initiation of the victorious Aztec king, of their kin and friends. Of course, never mind that these were slave captives from other tribes. So Wasson tries to play this whole thing down so that he can spin it into this new age mushroom cult that all the hippies believe today, and attack me for exposing Terrence McKenna and all these people as frauds, because not one of these people actually goes in and reads the original citations of these things. But all of these elements leave us in a quandary. And then Wasson goes on, a well-known mycologist has expressed his view that the victims, to prepare them for sacrifice, were fed massive doses of mushrooms. Quote, it now becomes comprehensible how the sacrificial feasts of ancient Mexico were unable to provoke any defense from the thousands of chosen human victims that were sacrificed in a cruel and bloody manner. They won the full cooperation of the victims, according to all appearances, after massive orgies of mushrooms. And then Wasson goes on to lie flat out, and I've shown this in other articles and places. I've still got to finish this article. I've been working on this article for years. I need to just get it done. It would probably take me a week or two to finish it. But Wasson continues on. There is no support for this conclusion in either Duran's Chronica X, which I've already just read Duran's quote, and Wasson had to truncate the whole first paragraph to even fit, to even jive with his propaganda, his J.P. Morgan CIA Subproject 58 propaganda, nor is there testimony of Sahugin's Nahuatl informants. Again, that's a lie. I've shown that many times. The lewd youth, the harlot woman's testimonies, all of this stuff. Them showing that this is false, and Modellini, he shows it's false. Wasson is just a pure POS, flat out CIA spin liar. Nothing that this man put out has any real academic value. He didn't really create the field of ethnomycology, as I showed, 6 years ago when I overturned the whole field when I published the article. His research and all of the parrots who cite his work in the whole field, Carl Ruck, Jonathan Ott, all of the other frauds involved in the CIA and that whole thing, they're all parroting the same fraud. That's why it's so easy to overturn these entire fields of academic study. So, so there is in Sahugin's informants, and I have those quotes right here. Actually, I have them in the wrong, I brought up the wrong citation. I have them here just so that people know that I am telling the truth, that all of that stuff is in these books. Here's the lewd youth discussing the lewd youth is a madman. He goes about drinking crude wine, a drunkard, foolish, dejected, a drunk Assad. He goes about eating mushrooms. He goes about demented. Now, these are the Nahuatl or the Aztec informants reporting to Friar Sahugin in the Florentine Codex. This is 16th century stuff, folks. And then the noble woman, the harlot, the carnal woman. I've read this many times about where he's talking about, the itching buttocks and all of this stuff right here. This is quotes that I've read many times. And then Modellini is in all of these quotes as well, and he's another important one that they like to play down. All of the evidence is there that shows that Wasson is a complete fraud, that, that all of these guys who parrot this stuff, what they do, as I expose in the Spies in Academic Clothing article, they all cite each other. None of them get down to the primary citations. So once you do that, you can quickly begin to see that they're all lined. So who was the unnamed mycologist, a well-known mycologist that Wasson mentions right here? He quotes right here. Well, that was Singer. And, so thanks to Marco in France, who actually went to the French National Museum in Paris for me to pull those citations, and we were able to prove that it was Singer that Wasson was trying to lie and spin a tale against to protect his CIA MKULTRA Subproject 58 agenda of peddling the psychedelic mushroom death cult to the youth of America. But first he had to do that by popularizing them into this pseudo, oh goodness, I need to trim my mustache, this pseudo New Age, spiritual religion that the CIA manufactured lock, stock, and barrel, that the hippies believe and the Terrence McKenna fans and the JRE fans all spread about. So, that's the bulk of, the evidence tying this whole death cult to the Aztecs and this ancient, process. You want to jump in? Your mic is muted there.
Sorry about that. So I was going to say, what do we think about how does this tie into some of the Toltec and some of the American Indian tribes, like who are they? The Comanche, the guys doing some blood sacrifices and also doing peyote while they were doing some of the really similar things. Does that fit into that?
Sorry, I was just reading some of the comments. What did you say?
I'm talking about the Toltec, some of the American Indian tribes, how the Comanche specifically. I think I have a whole stack of American Indian books over here. In one of them, I read that a few of the tribes were doing peyote and human sacrifices, just like the Maya Kichi, the Aztec, etc. I was just wondering.
Yeah, I haven't looked into that. That's highly possible. It looks like they manufactured, the entire peyote thing. There's evidence of the Huichol and the Yaqui Indians doing it, but there's no evidence before the 1850s of Native Americans using peyote at all. And then Quanah Parker, who was the Comanche or Cherokee chief, I forget which, he's the one who in 1891, he was a friend of President Roosevelt. But he's the one who sold the Native American church to the Native Americans. Before that, there was no anything of the kind.
Gotcha. Okay, so one thing that goes that I wanted to mention that goes right along these lines, we've got a theory backed up by a lot of the flamenco stuff and a lot of he doesn't specifically mention some of this, but I've kind of used some of his methods to kind of take this even further on some things I'm interested in, like paganism is sold to us as a blood ritualistic type of a thing that is from our ancient past, right?
Yeah, and this is evidence that proves that, that it's not part of European history. It was part of the paganism was part of the Jewish history, and they spun that to make it look like it was part of white European history. And we have guys like, Kyle Hunt on the Renegade Broadcasting and, who tried to attack me, and they sent their trolls after me because we exposed that is all a fraud, but they haven't, looked at the research. They won't go into the details. They think flamenco is fake without even looking at it,
Well, the problem is, if your entire platform is built on a house of cards, it's built on lies, then it can be trampled over pretty easily by the truth. If your house is built on truth, then it's got a very strong foundation, and truth fears no investigation. So, a lot of people think a lot of things, and that's why I'm open to all scenarios. I don't get so highly invested in some of my beliefs that I need to go out and attack other people. I let the truth stand alone. You know what I mean? But as far as the paganism thing goes, that's a really ironic thing that so you'll find in the truth movement, you'll see Christianity is kind of divided. Paganism and Christianity are kind of dividing large groups of people. So they're still doing this divide and conquer thing on massive scales.
Yeah, people have to figure out that truth is God, and then once they figure out that, then the rest of it starts to fall into place. But see, here we have Lita Blue in here. Paganism is not created by Judaism. No, who were the Baal worshippers and the Moloch worshippers, and they did the blood sacrifice rituals, and they promoted the psychedelics and all that stuff. I mean, sorry, you've drank the Kool-Aid and you haven't done any, real research, and you've bought into the fake history sold to everybody. But, Lita and the others, spreading faldo information about shamanism. See, we've exposed over 100 shows how shamanism was manufactured, the whole fake spiritualism was manufactured and sold by the CIA. We've been talking about the direct documents, showing it on screen, done hundreds of shows exposing all this, and you get people who still don't get it, won't read the papers that are right on screen. I already showed this for Lita. Read Entheogens, What's in a Name, read Spies in Academic Clothing. Get a clue. This stuff was manufactured by the CIA. You can check the citations. Check every citation and show it's wrong. You buy into this, manufactured, CIA religion that you were sold, Lita and the others in here, and you don't even think or question about it. It was manufactured. And so, I'm just going to block this person. They're just, they don't get it. They don't do any research. All they do is regurgitate what they were told to believe. And, we give them the trivium. We show them how to fact check each citation so that they can know for sure if we're telling the truth or not. But do they? Do they actually go through and read it? Do they actually go through and check the citations and go, wow, I was duped? Most of them don't. And every single attacker that I've ever come across who says comments like Lita in the chat there refuses to read this stuff. Now she's calling me a fraud. It's like, no, you're ignorant. Read the research. We've provided it for years. If you're too lazy and ignorant to read it and to free yourself and realize that that is the real MKUltra program, that the psychedelic counterculture and all the shamanism you've been sold, that is MKUltra, then you're blind. We've done over 100 shows exposing it. Wake up, do the research, show us how we're a fraud. Don't just name call and act like a child in the chat. It's pathetic.
Yeah, if you want to be taken seriously with your arguments, be strategic with how you formulate your argument, because we're not going to respond to non-arguments. It's a waste of time. You just chasing your tail.
I have an emotional opinion from no research because I was high on drugs and I listened to Terrence McKenna or Tim Leary talks or Joe Rogan told me so, and that's as far as their thinking goes. And it's like, Tim Leary admitting that he was a CIA agent. I mean, all of the evidence is in the articles. I've provided it. I've shown people where they can pull up the original citations from the Florentine Codex, at least have an iota of intelligence to check the research rather than just name calling. Sorry, go ahead, Caleb.
Well, I was just going to say, man, like people like Lita, I can see how you could get really defensive, if you feel like your belief system is being attacked, but you have to be open. You got to be open to being wrong. That's the only way you can let the best ideas float to the top, But anyways, the thing is, I have so much evidence at this point. I wouldn't mind debating any of these people. Like, I think somebody could learn a lot by, well, I guess you have to be open to being wrong before you can do any of that. But when I'm getting back to what I'm saying here. So getting back to this, a lot of these subjects that I want to bring up, sometimes I feel like I got to tiptoe through the tulips because, people are real sensitive about it. But, at this point, I'm just, I understand I'm giving a little bit of grammar without all the primary citations and stuff. I understand that. So, but believe me, I'm willing to go there if you want to go there.
Yeah. Well,
but as far as
just, to stifle this person, I'm going to pull up the Spies in Academic Clothing article. I mean, people, seriously, I released these articles years ago. Go through and fact check them, prove the work wrong. The CIA, all of the academics in the entire field of ethnobotany for the last 6 years have refused to address any of these citations. Here is a conversation between Tim Leary and Walter Boart. I preceded as an intelligence agent since 1962, understanding that the next war for control of this planet and beyond had to do with the control of consciousness. Yes, he answered strongly. I was a witting agent of the CIA. So you worked for the Central Intelligence Agency, I asked. Is it the deputy director of plans you work for? Of course, Walter Boart was dirty too. They're both playing the same, the dialectic game. Walter Boart's wife, Peggy Mellon Hitchcock, owned the Millbrook Mansion where the CIA and Leary and Ralph Metzner and these guys did their human experiments. Who makes out your checks? And then Leary says, it's none of your business to know how those things work. I'll answer you no questions that have to do with business. I'll answer you any questions about history or people. Now, let's go to this other quote here where Leary talks about, and you can see this in the video that's up here, but Leary says, all right, our undercover agents in Los Angeles. Undercover agents, Lita. Undercover agents. What does that mean, Lita? We're very cool about, and yet they did more in a very laid-back way, and it's been every bit as public as some of the other, the buses running around the country painted in Dayglow. And he's identifying Ken Kesey and the Merry Pranksters as also undercover agents. Our undercover agents. Our undercover agents. These are the MKUltra architects. These are the guys who manufactured MKUltra. These are the guys who sold the degeneracy, got everybody, fornicating in the mud at Woodstock to their graven images. Their rock idols. These are the guys who put this stuff together. Read the research, go through it, fact check it, and show how it's wrong. And so far, in all the years since these articles have been published, Lita and everybody else at the CIA and Ethnobotany et al., none of you have been able to debunk these articles. Why is that? Why do you guys, ridicule them and try to get everybody to not read them rather than just dealing with them honestly? I can't figure it out. Maybe because you don't have a leg to stand on and you're all exposed, the same thing with Terrence McKenna admitting that he was in PR and deep background for 15 years. They switched him over to public relations and he was recruited and all of this stuff. How many times do you have to see the same, MO before you get that these people are dirty? And, so thanks again, Polygonal. Thanks. Somebody post up a $50 donation, Bahare and everybody throwing up donations tonight. Please also throw Caleb some donations you want to give out your email address, Caleb, since it's yours?
Yeah, it's MICK, like a Mick, Irish Mick, .CALEB @gmail.com. And, just to take it back real quick to what I was saying about paganism. Look, I'm not trying to divide. I'm not trying to piss a whole bunch of people off, and further divide even more. The thing, we do have a lot in common in as far as common enemies, especially. So I think we should explore, be open to exploring some of these ideas. Don't just get triggered when we say some of this stuff. And like I said, I'm open to being wrong. But as far as I'm concerned right now, with the grammar that I have, the paganism thing, look, they're selling everybody that our ancient ancestors were the ones doing the blood sacrifices, drinking blood. They sell us this whole Viking thing where we're raping and warring and pillaging through and doing all, it's like,
oh yeah, we were barbarians. That's what you hear, Oh, the barbarian word. The Europeans were just these barbarian warring animals who went around and screwed up every peaceful shamanic culture.
And what I'm saying is that all these paganism beliefs kind of stemmed out of the Bacchanalian cults, which ended up turning into rabbinic Judaism. So can you imagine the horror? Some of the people who are, like Kyle, look, I'm not going to talk crap about Kyle personally. I think anybody who puts their name out and talks about our common enemies and, puts their livelihood on the line, because it's a very touchy thing to do. It's a very risky thing to do, respect for anybody that does that. Kyle's put out some good documentaries, like what's the Hellstorm is a great documentary. And then he also has one, he talks a lot about the attack on the Israeli attack on the USS Liberty.
Right.
So he does some good work. I'm not going to.
He's dead wrong about, veganism. He's, I was a vegan. It landed me in the ICU. It's the stupidest thing I ever did. But, all the key staples of that are, and John LeBon did a big hit piece on me, about this citation. But, Kyle refuses to look at the facts because he's a vegan. It's like when I was one, until I landed in the ICU and nearly died on my son's 3rd birthday, I was just, I gotta be, and then you realize all the phytic acid and oxalic acids and all the molds and, all of the gluten, how toxic legumes are, how kale and all this stuff has all this bad stuff in it. And then you realize, cholesterol and all of these things are where our brains, are made of and our reproductive system. And then you start to see the whole eugenics thing going on, and their promotion of of eugenics through veganism. Of course, men have always been, hunters and women gatherers, and the job of the men is to provide and protect. Well, the same tools that enable you to protect, the spear, the bow and arrow, the gun, etc., the knife, those are the same tools that are used to provide, to go out and hunt and gather animals. Nowhere in history were the men counting soybeans and these phytoestrogen beans called soy and stuff that the vegans want people to believe in. So they've fallen prey to all of this inversion stuff and this feminizing of men and masculinizing of women, and they it's like I've exposed many times. I'm just going to read this, because this will, I think, this one quote that I have from the Manufacturing the Deadhead article. It's from Gregory Bateson, whom, of course, was a key founder of the CIA, and he worked with the OSS. But and it goes into native revivalism, and so let me just make sure I have the right quote here. Hold on a second. I'm just hold on. I gotta find it here. Sorry, folks. Oh, good grief. Did I pull up the wrong article here? Okay, so the most significant experiment which has yet been conducted in the adjustment of relations between superior and inferior peoples is the Russian handling of their Asiatic tribes in Siberia. The findings of this experiment support very strongly the conclusion that it is very important to foster spectatorship among the superiors and exhibitionism among the inferiors. In outline, what the Russians have done is to stimulate native peoples to undertake a native revival. This is the same thing as the archaic revival of Terence McKenna, while they themselves admire the resulting dance festivals and other exhibitions of native culture, literature, poetry, music, and so on. And the same attitude of spectatorship is then naturally extended to the native achievements in production and or organization. In contrast to this, where the white man thinks himself as a model and encourages the native people to watch him in order to find out how things should be done, we find that the end nativistic cults spring up among the native people. This system gets overweighed until some compensatory machinery is developed, and then the revival of native arts, literature, etc., becomes a weapon for use against the white man. Okay, and this is Gregory Bateson's OSS memo that was released in, oh goodness. Anyway, you can find it in the articles up on the website. It might be in Theogen's What's in a Name that it's in. I forget sometimes because it's been years ago since I wrote these articles. But here it is. I'll get you the exact citation for that. And that's Gregory Bateson, Office of Strategic Services, Southeast Asia Command, Interoffice Memo from Gregory Bateson to Dylan Ripley. Subject, your memo number 53, dated 11/15/1944, released by the Central Intelligence Agency under Freedom of Information Act Request 1994, FOIA reference F94-151-1, found in Professor David Price's article, Gregory Bateson and the OSS, World War II and Bateson's assessment of applied anthropology. Okay, I'm not making this up, Lita, and the rest of you who still buy into this stuff. We can see that the paganism, the native revivalism, all of this stuff that's being sold, all of the, the Aztecs were so lovey-dovey, committing 2,000 to 8,000 human sacrifices and drinking the blood. Oh, well, that's just white people. None of that ever happened. Sorry, folks. Last year, the actual temples where they did this stuff and where the skulls and all were mounted in these huge racks were discovered in Mexico City. And now they've been able to prove that all of those reports were real and the Spaniards didn't just make it up. So, sorry, it wasn't just a lovey-dovey shamanism. And I want to read, and that, that professor I was trying to remember earlier, goodness, I just remembered it. That was Professor Neil Whitehead. And so I just want to read a couple of his quotes very quickly here, because it's just so important that people begin to grasp this stuff. He says, shamanism is a burgeoning obsession for the middle classes around the globe. Its presentation in popular books, TV specials, and on the internet is dominated by the presumed psychic and physical benefits that shamanic techniques can bring. This heightened interest has required a persistent purification of the ritual practices of those who inspire the feverish quest for personal meaning and fulfillment. Ironically, given the self-improvement motivations that have brought so many into the popular understanding of shamanism, that doesn't mean the real stuff. That means the popular New Age Esalen mind control crap fed to you by the CIA, Lita. Two defining aspects of shamanism in Amazonia, blood, i.e. violence, and tobacco, have simply been erased from such representations. Such erasure is not only a vain self-deception, but more important, it is a recapitulation of colonial ways of knowing through both the denial of radical cultural difference and a refusal to think through its consequences. And that's footnote number 25, Professor Neil Whitehead and Dr. Robin White, In Darkness and Secrecy, Duke University, 2004, page 1. You don't even have to get past page 1 to find that, folks. So
yeah,
anyway.
and if you're looking for more grammar on some of the dark shamanism stuff, Jan actually did a really good interview a while back. Just type it into YouTube.
That was one of the very first shows I ever did.
Yeah, Kabbalah and dark shamanism and all that. It's a good show. Okay, one thing real quick just to mention. I wanted to, so that we don't have to have a part 3 of this, just kind of wanted to mention the interesting stuff you'll start to uncover when you look into the whole holy blood, holy grail type of stuff, and how that actually may be a misdirection for the actual truths are hidden in there somewhere. You start to realize they have really strong opinions about blood, and they're very esoteric, and what very few people understand how they have these bloodlines that they continue, and they specifically are doing specific things with their blood. And I think a lot of the metaphors you hear about vampirism play into the science of blood and DNA, and how your DNA, I gotta be real careful how much I say here, but how much your DNA passes on through your genetic lineage, and why family trees were so important in both royal Christianity and apostolic Christianity, when they talk about the bloodline of Christ, and they talk about the seed of Satan and all these things. They were very important notions, and not just in the Bible, in throughout history. You get these tones when you read all of the history from. It's in Titus Livy's history. It's in Homer's history, which is Homer's stuff is really just. We'll get into that at some point. That's a big tangent, but the point is there's something very interesting about, and I would say there's got to be links to what the understanding of Rh positive and Rh negative and how that all works. A lot of people might just blow that off as insignificant, but a lot of people don't know this. But if you go do the research, Rh negative mother tries to have a kid with an Rh positive father. They need to have a special drug to make that happen. And before they invented the drug, it wasn't happening. If it ever did for some reason happen, then they had hemophilia problems, all these things. So there's a very deep subject to study under this whole Rh negative, Rh positive stuff, and the holy blood, holy grail stuff as well. And I'd like to get into it at some point. It's a very touchy subject, and we got to be careful what we say. But one of these days, we're planning on putting that all together as well. But that needed to be said, just because the whole vampire thing is all about blood, And a lot of the metaphors have a lot to do, in my opinion, with what they understand about bloodlines. So sorry to be vague about that, but
Absolutely. Well, we're already at an hour and a half. Is this a good place to wrap it up?
yeah, I've got all my notes pretty much covered. So
Cool. Well, I think I got all of mine covered as well. I think that's it for me. Let's
I think
see.
there was a pretty good comment up here I was going to try to get to.
Sure.
Man, now there are so many, it's hard to find. Let's see. Let's see.
Well, and while you're looking for that, people, please donate. mick.caleb@gmail.com. Please also go to logosmedia.com and support the show. We appreciate everybody's support tonight, all your help. It definitely helps fund the research and everything that we do here. Thank you, everybody in there who's contributed, also questions and information as well. And, thanks for the trolls as well for giving us, some people to laugh at as well.
So Justin Kelly said, Caleb, the story of Vlad the Impaler is an inspiring story that inspires noble virtue despite hopelessness. I really wanted to get to Vlad. Sorry, I didn't get to that. There's a whole can of worms there with, when you start to understand, it was the Crusades were going on at that point. So there was a war going on, and the story of Vlad the Impaler has to be unpacked. It isn't. It shouldn't be taken just at face value. And thanks for saying that. There's also a comment about. This is interesting. I'll have to look into this. Adrenochrome happens in the animal kingdom every day. Predator versus prey animals eaten alive. I'll take that into consideration and look at that as well, because I'm always trying to understand nature and learn how we can learn from nature as well.
Yeah, and it has to do with the blood, and the Bible is very specific that you're not supposed to eat the blood or drink the blood when you kill an animal, and we're sure now, at least I'm sure that, in my opinion, this is why. But, so, and the vegans would, have Africa put up chain link fences to keep the lions eating grass and stuff, and of course they'd be all killed off very quickly.
And somebody's like talking about how it's disgusting that we would advocate for animal ritualistic murder, but talk about how humans. But it's like, okay, hold on a second.
Animals don't do ritualistic murder. Animals kill for food and for survival.
No, I think it was a vegan stab at meat eaters, is what I think it was.
Oh, well, they don't think, they just use emotion,
Well, I would just respond by saying, hold on a second. I'm not advocating for the system that we have to be as a good example of how it should be. I think it's disgusting, a lot of the things that happen. And last show we talked about the sick and disgusting practices of the meat industry, mostly ran by the kosher industry.
Yeah.
Which,
well, you pay a tax to have a rabbi bless your food. I mean, if you can avoid any food that's kosher, you should avoid buying it. Look for those, those kosher tax stamps. That's a secret tax, and you go back into the show archives. Certified, hidden taxes on our food are robbing you blind, or how hidden taxes on our food are robbing you blind. And if you realize that these are hidden taxes that one small group of people is forcing on the rest of society, then you start to get it. But, the kosher food is bad. Don't buy that stuff.
Yeah. That's just, I would advocate, obviously it's like something more along the lines of hunting and using all the animal that you can and not wasting anything. That's the type of stuff that I would advocate for. Somebody said, Vlad the Impaler connection to Prince Charles, royal blood, red carpets, vampires, it's all connected. Yep. That's as far as my research is leading me. I'd agree with that.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of the red carpet connection. I'll have to look into that more. Well, all right. So that's probably a good place to break, and we'll figure out more research on the way. Of course, you can email us if you have any more research and whatnot to send us. And if you actually do find any errors in the work, we're happy to look at it. Please provide your citations. Don't just say we're wrong or frauds because you were told otherwise, by your liberal professor in a fake university. You were told what to think, not how to think. So anyway, thank you, everybody. And that's a wrap. Good night.
Night, everybody.